Sorry, folks. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Paige Vignola, and on behalf of the Manchester Community Library, I welcome you to our fall festival event, Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure and the Hope of Utopian Futures with Ace Lerner. Each year, Vermont Humanities hosts a fall festival for the Arts and Humanities Month. This year's theme is 50 years forward and looks at the many challenges facing our communities and highlights moments of celebration as we move forward into a critical time period to create a more welcoming and resilient state. So we're going to learn more about this particular event at vermonthumanities.org, and for more information about the festival and the events happening across the state. Before we continue this evening, I just want to give you a couple of notes on things that are happening here in Manchester. Manchester has taken the Fall Festival and kind of run with that, the concept of expanding international cultures in the community. So I would like you to know we have a French conversation group that's starting next week. We'll meet every Thursday through mid-November. There are two sections that are meeting. Beginner French is going to be from 5 to 6:15, and intermediate or advanced French conversation is going to be 6:15 to 7 p.m. This year, Taconic Music is hosting their third International Voices Music and Poetry from Around the World event that celebrates different cultures, languages, and diversity, and takes place on October 12th at 2 p.m. here in the library. Immigrants from Europe, South America, and Asia now residing in southern Vermont talk briefly about their personal journey to the United States. They'll read a poem in their native language and then a translation in English. The event is part of the Fall Festival for the Arts and is generously underwritten by Vermont Humanities. Later this month, we have a spirited look at Halloween folklore. So we're going to join author and mystery maven Roxy Zwicker for an enchanted evening explaining mysteries, traditions, and magic of the Halloween season. And Roxy will share the traditions of the spooky season, and guests can discover fascinating and little-known superstition folklore. The next live-streamed Fall Festival event is at the Ilsley Library in Montpelier. It's going to feature Ava Solberger from 7 Days, reflecting on Stuck in Vermont video series, and that's going to take place at 1 p.m. on October 9th. Please make sure you register online to receive a link for that live stream. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker. Lerner's writing on art and visual culture has appeared in numerous peer-reviewed and internationally recognized journals and anthologies. Lerner's artwork has been exhibited at multiple reputable international museums and galleries. And Dr. Ace Lerner is currently the tenure-track assistant professor of art and art history at the University of Vermont. So please join me in welcoming our valued speaker.
Thanks, Paige. Hey everyone, good evening. Thanks to everybody who's come out today in person so much. It's awesome that you're here. And then thanks everybody who's joining online. And then I just wanted to say extra thanks to Jacob and Paige and Noel and everyone at the Vermont Humanities Center and the library here for making this possible. So I'm really excited to be speaking with you all. Before I get into my talk, I just wanted to say a couple brief notes on terms. So failure has been part of queerness since the term's reclamation in the 1980s, and queerness as a method fails to perform in ways that mainstream culture encourages. Queers fail to perform normativity when it comes to romantic partners, sexualities, gender identities, family structures, and so much more. And queer and queerness as a methodology proposes that to be normative is not necessary, and to throw out norms and essentialisms and call them into question. So queers and queerness as an idea fail on purpose as a means of creating other possibilities. The idea of utopia, I look to Jose Esteban Munoz, a queer theorist, and his 2009 book, Cruising Utopia, the Then and There of Queer Futurity, in which he describes utopia as something on the horizon, something we must always strive towards. And so these concepts of queer failure and utopian futures undergird my project, Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure, just as they're foundational to my ongoing interventions in art, visual culture, publishing projects, and pedagogy. So it's through failing intentionally to reproduce exclusionary, oppressive, problematic, and short-sighted norms that we're able to work towards a utopian future that's ever present and also just out of reach. I'll begin tonight with also a land acknowledgement. I want to extend my gratitude and appreciation to those who lived and worked on this land before us, those whose stewardship and resilient spirit makes our meeting possible on this traditional homeland of the Wabanaki, Mohican, and others. I also acknowledge the thousands of Native Americans who currently call this region home, and I want to be sure to acknowledge the long and brutal history of colonization and racism, as well as the ongoing resilience and resistance that has made this country what it is today. Also, I want to encourage all of us to think about how we're connected to these histories and what we can do as citizens, artists, thinkers, makers, hairstylists, barbers, to work towards a more just present and future. Or, in the words of Métis Chelsea Vowell, if we think of territorial acknowledgements as sites of potential disruption, they can be transformative acts that to some extent undo Indigenous erasure. I believe this is true as long as these acknowledgements discomfit both those speaking and hearing the words. The fact of Indigenous presence should force non-Indigenous peoples to confront our own place on these lands. Along with considering our place on the land and these ideas, I wanted to turn also to the ACLU map of the current 530 anti-LGBTQ bills being tracked in the United States. The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, was founded in 1920 and it's committed to the ongoing fight for the rights of people as outlined in the U.S. Constitution. The ACLU is currently tracking 530 anti-LGBTQIA+ bills across the United States. The number of bills targeting our communities is denoted on the website by relative color saturation. So the dark purple means there are numerous bills, and the gray means that there are zero. And you can see that in Vermont, currently, there are 2. A cursory visual comparison of these 2 maps reveals the differences in worldviews about land and living. While the native land map reflects a fluidity of lives across the continent, the ACLU map makes clear the rigid binary logic of colonial relations. And it does not fully contend with the complexity of lives lived in human-land relations, especially with regard to traversing of space and how our identities are bound up with these bifurcations as well. Studying the maps with a queer utopian lens reveals some insights. We can view the connection between the colonization of the land and how it's directly interconnected with the construction of subject formations by systemic removal of rights from one colonized jurisdiction to the next. Or, in the words of trans scholar Jian Neo Chen, quote, European colonization occurred through successive attempts that relied not only on shared information on geography, indigenous nations, and resources, but also on the mapping of European gender and sexuality onto bodies. The colonial mapping of land and the colonial mapping of gender and sexuality onto bodies are part and parcel of the same oppressive system. It must be noted that, of course, there are various strategies of resistance to genocide, the colonial project, and gender oppression, varying by degree across geopolitical locations. So the colonial ideology about binarily located boundaries that mark one side of a state line versus the other without permeability is the same kind of logic that upholds binary gender norms, right? Where we're drawing lines and drawing divisions and we're not letting them be permeable, right? But it's a different type of ideology. It's a very colonialist ideology versus one that allows for more fluidity. Prior to colonization on the continent of Turtle Island, there were numerous identities that were outside of, beyond, and more complex and more nuanced than the ideas that we have about gender and sexuality today under the sort of prevalent Euro-American colonialist model. So not just thinking about mapping, but thinking about all visual culture, we can see that visual culture has been and continues to be integral to the transmission of oppressive cultural norms, especially when it comes to the upholding of white supremacy, cis supremacy, and heteropatriarchy. Representations of identities in mainstream or dominant visual culture, historically in the US in particular, have been mobilized to outline expectations about acceptable sexual and gendered appearances. The colonial logic that bifurcates areas on maps via essentializing pseudo-logic is the same colonial perspective that binarily divides norms of masculinity and femininity. Perusing some quintessential barbershop posters, it becomes apparent that even when we think we're just looking at barbershop posters, we're not looking actually at a menu of diverse hairstyles for people who might walk in, but we're actually observing a relatively narrow menu of types of masculinity to choose from. A whitish-looking man with fairly short hair, no facial hair, a sharp jawline, relatively expressionless. This continues to be upheld as this sort of desired archetype and is repeatedly displayed across visual culture, including in barbershops. And yet, a barbershop is ostensibly a place where someone goes to get haircut. Why, then, is the menu of preferable options so constrained? And why, then, when trans people and women and other identifying folks that don't narrowly fit select to get a haircut in a barbershop, are they frequently and often denied service and oftentimes meet hostility? Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure, is an installation and social practice performance in which I queerly fail to replicate the aesthetics and social interactions of barbershops. Instead of replicating heteropatriarchal masculinity, Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure is visually luscious, radically inclusive, and audience members and participants can receive a queerly failing haircut by yours truly in exchange for an act of queer world making. But in order to dive into this a little bit more, I wanted to just share a little bit more about myself as well. So I earned my MFA in Fine Art and an MA in Visual Studies from California College of the Arts, studying with Tammy Ray Carland, Larry Sultan, and Titi Takamoto, located in San Francisco and in Oakland in the Bay Area in California. My work has appeared across photography and video, performance, collaborations, installation collaborations, and I completed a PhD in 2020 in the history of art and visual culture, visual studies from University of California, Santa Cruz, where I was recruited by Derek Conrad Murray and advised by him, and then my committee was comprised of Jennifer Gonzalez, Marcia Ochoa, and Amelia Jones. My work has appeared in many peer-reviewed journals such as Cultural Politics, Visual Studies, Art Journal, the Journal of Visual Cultures, as many as other anthologies on contemporary art and visual culture, such as Expanding the Parameters of Feminist Artivism, Visual Culture Approaches to the Selfie, and I recently co-authored a chapter with Amelia Jones in her newest book, co-edited with Jane Chin Davidson, A Companion to Contemporary Art in a Global Framework. I also was the guest editor of the first ever issue of Art Journal dedicated to trans visual culture, and subsequently the co-guest editor of a special issue of Media N, the Journal of the New Media Caucus, and the issue was dedicated to trans-embodied methodologies in contemporary media art. My first book was entitled Self-Representations in an Expanded Field, From Self-Portraiture to Selfie, Contemporary Art in the Social Media Age, and I'm currently working on another book, Trans Representations, Decolonizing Visual Theory in Contemporary Photography. The project engages rigorous interdisciplinary research combining fields of trans studies, visual studies, theories of racialization, cultural studies, performance studies, photography, history, and theory. And informed by the contemporary portrait photographs central to each chapter, my research demonstrates that transvisual studies is a dynamic field with constantly evolving and innovative methodologies, and that in studying transvisualities via a transvisual studies method, there are numerous unprecedented insights, one of which is the transing of identity. The book project focuses on the period surrounding what has been called the trans tipping point, which I more aptly describe and explore as the proliferation of transvisual culture, a period in which transvisual culture is exploding and met with great political and social backlash. I argue that this period, beginning in the mid-1990s, is characterized by transvisual culture playing a crucial role in the negotiation of trans identities. If we think back to the map of the 530 anti-LGBTQ bills, you can see why this is pretty important work, in my humble opinion. And via an art historical approach, we can also clearly see how representations have been bound up with the negotiation of identity, especially when it comes to trans identities. As interdisciplinary post-colonial scholar Homi Bhabha observes, it's via anxious repetition of fixed representations of given groups that cultures begin to believe a group of people is a certain way. Regardless of its facticity, due to its continuous circulation, the stereotype becomes believed. This is achieved due to the fixity of the image and the consistent assumptions attached to it. This, in turn, forms a cultural belief and expectation about a given group of people. When it comes to trans people, it is often these essentialized and stereotypic representations of trans constituencies that are the only trans subjects most people encounter. And by extension, these problematic representations then inform how members of these groups should and will be treated. Singular portrait photographs, as we've culturally and historically understood them in the so-called Western context, tend to fix moments in time, allow sustained and unchallenged looking, and encourage viewers to read surfaces for clues for some deeper understanding, and present a literal fraction of a second in a person's life as an encapsulation of who they are. Historically, trans people have been visually compared to cis people. Trans masculinity has been under-imaged, and for the most part erased. While embodying feminine aesthetics, trans femmes have representationally been mobilized in visual culture as showcasing aesthetics associated with those who've been trained to devalue and consume, while also suggesting that to be trans is to be policed, harassed, and imprisoned. Embodying feminists beyond cis femininity, trans femme people often are sensationalized as objects of spectacular fascination, and the heightened sexualization of trans femmes in dominant visual culture is often aligned with dominant cultural ideologies. The coupling of transphobia and misogyny directed at trans femmes as art historically objectified them and demeaned their personhood. Positioning trans feminine folks as objects to be perused, exploited, and discarded, trans femme activist and scholar Julia Serrano has noted that trans misogyny tends to create trans representations only in lipstick and heels. Building on the work of Moya Bailey, the concept of trans misogynoir has been developed to interrogate the interconnection between trans misogyny and anti-blackness. It's been well documented that there is an overwhelming and disproportionate amount of violence targeting black trans feminine people globally and in the US especially. So in the fight to protect LGBTQ rights, it's extremely important to fight to protect black trans feminine folks. Trans feminist activists Miss Major Griffith Gracie and Cece McDonald noted that perhaps because icons like Laverne Cox are unreachable to would-be aggressors, that it leads to this violence targeting black and brown trans feminine people in daily life. As trans feminist artist and scholar Misha Cardenas has argued, the increased mainstream visibility of transgender people has brought about solidification of who is an acceptable trans person and who is disposable. Now, more than ever, Cardenas writes, it's evident that visibility is a trap. And it's this tension around creating stereotypes and visibility and representation that is what I'm really kind of interested in across all of my research and with this kind of barbershop poster and this barbershop project. And I'm trying to suggest that it's this culturally constructed understanding that representations are synonymous with knowledge, that this is actually some kind of a truth trap, actually, right? And so we need to kind of tease apart what's actually happening. Okay, so that was a little bit about where my thinking and my research is going. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about barbershop with a little bit more foundation this way. So in 2018, I was invited to do a residency at the Wasaic Project in Wasaic, New York. And during the residency, I was further invited to make a limited edition screen print in their print shop. At the time, I was thinking a lot about these ideas that I've just been describing to you. And I was also thinking about the policing of gender in places like barbershops. And I also really enjoy going to barbershops, but I'm intimately aware of the tension that arises when people who don't appear to be cis, straight, masculine go into barbershops. There's often a lot of tension and hostility that arises. I was also thinking a lot about Jack Halberstam's book, The Queer Art of Failure. It was published in 2011, and The Queer Art of Failure is about finding alternatives to conventional understandings of success in a heteronormative capitalist society, to academic disciplines that conform what is already known according to approved methods of knowing, and to cultural criticism that claims to break new ground but cleaves to conventional archives. Halberstam is a professor of gender and English at Columbia University and director of the Institute for Research on Women, Gender, and Sexuality. Halberstam has written books such as Skin Shows, Gothic Horror, and the Technology of Monsters, Female Masculinity, In a Queer Time and Place, The Queer Art of Failure, Trans, A Quick and Quirky Account of Gender Variance, and others. So the poster that I came up with while in residence is kind of a spin-off of those iconic barbershop posters that I showed you earlier. And it is now the kind of iconic barbershop, The Art of Queer Failure, print and poster that I've subsequently made into totes and t-shirts. It was a hand-drawn poster and then screen printed in this kind of iconic barbershop style. But instead of showcasing various versions of heteropatriarchal, cisnormative masculinity masquerading as haircuts, the poster images queer and trans culture producers. So Butch is Leslie Feinberg, trans feminist icon, activist, author of Transgender Warriors and Stone Butch Blues, which is a novel loosely based on Feinberg's life. Alabanza is Travis Alabanza, who's a black British gender nonconforming trans femme poet and theater maker, famous for their internationally renowned play Burgers. Rhys Ernst is known for his collaborative photographic project Relationship that debuted at the Whitney Biennial in 2013, co-created with Zachary Drucker. He's also a filmmaker in his own right. Andy is, of course, the iconic Andy Warhol, queer interdisciplinary artist par excellence. Rue, the iconic RuPaul, drag queen, musician, actor, TV personality, and so much more at this point. Seven is Seven King, a trans filmmaker. Leather Baby is a drawing of Robert Mapplethorpe. Alok is gender nonconforming, non-binary, beyond the binary, author, activist, and performer. Also now a comedian, goes by Alok. Peaches is, of course, the queer musician Peaches. Mac is trans queer photographer Amos Mac. Claude is a surrealist artist and gender pirate pioneer, Claude Cahun. TT is scholar, artist, filmmaker, and queer icon, TT Takamoto, who, when I first made the poster, went by Tina and then subsequently changed to TT, so I've gone into the edition of posters and crossed out and corrected that. So again, it's kind of flipping the script on the iconic barbershop poster, but it's also supplying kind of poetically an informational set on these different icons for people to know about. So while making the piece in residence at the Wasaic Project, I was thinking also about how barbershops in aesthetics themselves are often creating sort of a narrative of this kind of limited palette, another narrative of cis-normative masculinity. So I was trying to think about how to kind of queer that space as well. So I came upon some aesthetics that felt much more queer, like glitter curtains and colored pom-poms, cool textiles and fabrics. And I created this installation for the summer exhibition at the Wassaic Project after doing the residency, where the poster was featured in the space. And a little blurb about the project here is, in exchange for a queer failure haircut, participants agree to engage in an act of queer world making before their haircut grows out. The exchange associated with your haircut will be negotiated before or during your haircut. Some suggested acts of queer world making in exchange for your haircut can be found posted in the installation. Haircuts are given by the artist Ace Laner, who is not a trained barber, but who has been cutting hair outside of sanctioned barber channels for over a decade, hence part of the ethos of queer failure. I'm going to pop out and show a short video that also explains it, that I also captured some footage in the installation. So bear with me while I just pop over to that. Just a couple minutes long, a little bit of a good overview.
When we're seeing fewer and fewer queer spaces where queer community can gather publicly, the closing of gay bars, queer bars, dyke bars, and maybe it's due to the internet, maybe it's due to the expensive rent, sort of in response to thinking about the lack of queer space, and also what do they all have to be bars? What about sober people? What about intergenerational queerness? So thinking about a lot of these things and trying to figure out how to make a celebratory space where we can all come together as queers, and also a porous space where our friends who maybe are straight and queer friendly want to be able to hang out with us to create a porous queer space. I was thinking a lot about that, and then I was also thinking about Jack Halberstam's concept of queer failure, something that really always resonates with me. So taking that on, and then also in combination with the fact that I'm often cutting my own hair or cutting my friend's hair, somehow all these things swirling around really came to a head and in this project, Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure. Embracing this ethos in the installation, which is a barbershop, I give haircuts to people in exchange for an act of queer world making. I'm not a trained barber, but that part, they're going to get a haircut that sort of fails, but it's going to have sort of a queer aesthetic. And the space of a barbershop, which sort of fails to be a barbershop, but also has a queer aesthetic. It's got glitter, it's got disco balls, it's covered in aluminum foil, like Andy Warhol's factory. It's got leopard and zebra print. It's got, sort of culty queer things happen. In exchange for their queer haircuts, the participant agrees to carry out some sort of act of queer world making before their haircut grows out, and that is negotiated during the haircut. So we end up having these really lovely, intimate conversations, myself and the person getting the haircut, about perhaps they identify as queer or trans, or they are intimately familiar with someone and how to maybe an ally, or perhaps they're a cis straight person, but they want to participate and they want to become an ally. And so the conversations really vary from people in elementary school getting haircuts and standing up to protect their queer friends, to cis straight people having conversations on behalf of sort of forwarding queer and trans knowledge in the broader community, having difficult conversations with family members who might be a bit closed-minded, and I sort of help them coach them through that. So it's a really lovely exchange that we get to have, and then there's people sort of sitting and watching on the sidelines and listening. But for me, I guess as an artist, I really enjoy having these intimate conversations and then having them be part of a larger community and have that knowledge and critical thinking around identity and representation and gender and sexuality sort of trickle outward through this really playful and really fun community space. Like people just kind of, they hear the music playing, they see the disco, they see the party lights, they want to come, they want to hang out, and then sort of under that sort of playful aesthetic,
sort of have quite challenging conversations about queerness and identity. So that installation that you're seeing there and those video clips are all from the Wasaic Project summer show. So it was up for a couple months actually. The Wasaic Project is a residency, and then there's also this old mill building on their campus that's 7 stories tall of different galleries. It's a really incredible place to go see art, and so the summer show has hundreds, maybe not quite hundreds, lots of art in the exhibition. And my project was on the 5.5 floor, so it was quite the journey to get, in particular, that giant mirror all the way up there. Myself and the residency director were like holding it and like trying to fit it around these tiny, tiny stairs to get all the way up there. But so that was the first iteration, and I did 2 performances, one at the opening and then one at another event that Wasaic was having. And you can see there's a chalkboard here where people can actually sign up their name and their time, first come, first serve basis. And both times I was cutting hair the entire time, and it was many hours long. So it was, I didn't know how it was going to go that first go around, but it was really incredible. There were some little kids that wanted to participate, and looked like their parents were around. So I was like, is this gonna be okay? Are you okay with this? They were very supportive. So it was a very community kind of vibe, and people were really receptive and really willing to go for some really queerly failing haircuts. This is my friend Adam, part of the collective Ghost of a Dream. He's also kind of affiliated with the Wasaic Project. And he came in and he requested the double peaches. So he had very long curly hair, and he was really game to just go for it. So it's always really rewarding to see what people are up for in terms of haircuts. And then it's also really rewarding to see the conversations, as you heard in the video, that people really take on doing some really important work, and the project kind of becomes like a nudge to get people to kind of to do something actually. And it's really lovely how everyone else in the space kind of bears witness to that. Out of the Wasaic Project show, somebody participated and was a member of Practice Gallery in Philadelphia, and so I was invited to do a solo show at Practice Gallery in Philadelphia. So I brought Barbershop there. Practice Gallery was pleased to present Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure. And then here's some images of how that installation went. So it was a bigger space, it was just a solo show. So responding to that space and taking up room in that space was, an interesting and different challenge. I included the video in the installation as well, which you can see. The sign-up chalkboard here, some didactic text to kind of help explain. Again, so many people came out to the opening and participated, and I was cutting hair the whole time of the opening. It's really amazing. I also invited queer scholar Alpesh Patel, who teaches at Temple in Philadelphia, to come, and he came, and there he was. So I was very excited. He writes about queer failure. I was like, you should come check it out. So it was wonderful. Another thing that happens with this project is that I had a limited edition comb made, which engraved on the kind of hot red comb in gold is Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure. My name, A. Slainer. And so in exchange, I also give folks a takeaway comb, which kind of serves as kind of a reminder of whatever the intention set that they made. When they take it out, to kind of remind them of what it was that they said that they were going to do, but it's also this kind of act of gratitude and generosity as well on my part. I document the participants with a Polaroid and then include those Polaroids in the next iteration of the exhibition, so you'll see them each time. Another iteration of this project that I wanted to share with you all too. In the fall of 2023, I was invited to bring my project to the Fleming Museum at the University of Vermont as part of a faculty exhibition. So thank you to them for that. They were kind enough to create a special space within the museum and build this wall so that I could create a smaller, more intimate experience in the context of this massive group show. And you can see how I transformed the space there, including that video that I just shared with you on the wall, so that while I'm not there, it exists as an installation. And when I'm not there to activate it, and I activated it at the opening and then at another event again, the video kind of serves as a way to kind of explain and show what it looks like when it's being activated. You can see some of the hair on the floor that kind of collects after the opening. Similarly, again, people were really game to participate. Some folks even drove really far to come and participate, which I was really thrilled about. It was very cool. It's my colleague Steve Buddington. Shout out to Steve. I also exhibited my 10-foot tall photograph, KISSING, in the group show, which is about queer intimacy in public space. And the figures are life-size, but somewhat obscured by the crop of the image. I also have exhibited that in other spaces as well, but I thought it might just be nice to see the pairing. And then most recently, the project has appeared at Spring Break in New York just last month. So Spring Break is an internationally recognized exhibition platform using underused, atypical, and historic New York City exhibition spaces, activating and challenging traditional cultural landscape of the art market, typically, but not exclusively, during Armory Arts Week in New York and Frieze Week in LA. And the 13th edition of Spring Break Art Show in New York was in early September 2024. And the founders here are Andrew Gorey and Amber Kelly. And they sort of provide no and low cost exhibition space, facilitating kind of visionary perspectives, both established and unknown, that are charged with engaging these areas under a unifying theme of the show. The theme of this year's show was interior, exterior. And in order to participate in Spring Break, a booth has to be curated, and the curator has to create a proposal for one or two artists to be in a space, and then it goes through a rigorous jurying process. And the proposal has to relate to the theme of the year. So again, to interior, exterior. So my dear friend, curator, visual culture scholar, and expert in queer theory as it relates to contemporary art and visual culture, Kate Korok, curated my project, Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure, for Spring Break 2024 in New York, which was really great because we're often looking for lovely ways to collaborate, and this was a fantastic way to do so. And not only did she curate the exhibition, but her trade for her queerly failing haircut, her act of queer world making, is to bring the project to where she is based in Traverse City, Michigan. So you can see a little bit of Kate's haircut. She's got some cool little queer lines. And I thought I would also include the sort of before of what the space looked like, a view of the outside of the space from down below on the street. You can see the glitter curtains through the 10th floor window, walking up to the space, and then the installation. And I thought I would kind of share the curatorial statement while showing some images. So, Barbershop, the Art of Queer Failure, by artist, interdisciplinary visual studies scholar, and self-taught barber Ace Lehner, is an installation and social practice performance. For Spring Break, Lehner will install their queer take on the aesthetics and social interactions of barbershops. The entrance of the barbershop will be marked by a gold glitter curtain. Inside, the walls are festooned with robustly textured and patterned textiles. A playful mix of various queer music orally shapes the ambiance. Lehner carefully selected adornments create a celebratory mood akin to a queer club coupled with a campy parlor. Key concepts undergirding Barbershop are queerness as praxis and world-making via the porousness of interiority and exteriority of individuals in attendance, the installation, the performance, and the cultural reverberations of the project. The focal wall of the installation features a pom-pom mirror, a table with barbering accoutrements, and Polaroid photographs of participants. One wall has a bench for audience members to rest, as well as a sign-up chalkboard where participants can join the wait list for a cut. Walls feature photos of various queer people from history giving haircuts, as well as Lehner's screen print Barbershop, The Art of Queer Failure, and other hair-related drawings. A barber chair sits at the center of the space and serves as the key platform for the performance. Audience members can sign up to be participants, sit in the chair, receive a queer haircut. Haircuts are not free, but part of the exchange. Lehner is not a trained barber, but has been cutting hair outside of sanctioned barbershops for over a decade. Their failure to cut hair according to accredited protocols of hairstyling is an act of resistance. The exhibition's Fall 2024 theme of interior-exterior provides an opportunity to contextualize Lehner's installation and social practice performance through queerness as praxis. Queerness as an intimate level can be described as the porousness of our inner and deeply often private selves and our self-expression, our outward presentation. Ever fluid, the interaction of these aspects can be out of our control. There are parts we can claim. Hairstyles can be one way of claiming autonomy over self-presentation. By sitting in Lehner's seats, folks collaborate with Lehner to participate in this act of queerness. On a greater scale, audience members come into the space, have a queer interaction, and then go back into the world. The words and conversations that are stimulated within the makeshift barbershop are constellations of queer world makings themselves that begin in the warm, bright, cheerful, and safe space. The sitter then goes forth and performs their act. In addition, every other person who encounters the performance and installation also carries the experience and conversations with them. The slow time and deep care of community generated in Lehner's performance and the performance ephemera contradict or perhaps disidentify with heteropatriarchal and capitalist notions of social engagement and exchange. The project asks questions about essentialist beliefs about masculinity and binary gender. Barbershops are notoriously great vehicles for all types of conversations, and the queer aesthetics and ethos of the installation facilitates celebrating queerness and gender nonconformity. It's essential to create queer space, particularly in this political climate, and when the numbers of queer spaces in the United States are dwindling. This space is not meant to essentialize what queerness is. Anyone is welcome to participate, observe, hang out in the space. Queerness is porous and expansive. So it also, in looking at this and thinking about this presentation, got me thinking about, too, that the porousness also permeated social media in an interesting way, where a lot of the documentation became also about how it's Instagrammability and how it sort of circled out kind of that way as well. The acts of care that came out of this too. There were also often many folks who came through who are already doing so much work in these kind of social justice movements, queer movements, around trans issues. And so oftentimes a conversation about how to figure out how to do an act of queer world making was actually to take care for oneself because they were already doing so much work. And so sometimes the conversation that we had sort of gave people permission to actually queerly fail to show up for something that was actually, I want to say, sort of normative in some way, or maybe it was oppressing them in some way, or it was too difficult in some way, right? And so it kind of gave them permission to queerly fail, to kind of do too much, and to turn that into an act of care for oneself. Here's a kind of jar of combs, and then on the Spring Break website, there's also this way for other people to participate, to support the project, because there is a lot of generosity involved. And Spring Break is sort of an art fair in this way, where they're asking people to sell artwork. So I kind of turned it into a way to kind of get the message out through the combs, the posters, the t-shirts. I'm about to wrap up, but I wanted to share one other thing that was great that happened in the space, was that I had a wonderful collaboration with Nacho, who might be in the audience today in his other form. Instead of just having people sign up for their haircuts, we had a performance at 6 p.m. that Nacho came, and he read some of his wonderful and hilarious and important cowboy poetry. He also measured his mustache against other mustaches in the room, and he did allow me to cut one single mustache hair. Before engaging in a commitment to an act of queer world making, he ran away because we realized that he is an act of queer world making, and so if we had to come up with one, the whole thing would unravel. There were beautiful, interesting moments that happened too, where the floor, which was covered in aluminum foil, became a record of everyone that participated in this nice way. A little shot of the detritus, and then I thought I would just throw in a couple of the Polaroids of the people who participated and their different acts of queer world making that they are going to do. And then before I run out of time, until we have time for a Q&A, I think I'll pause there because I'm happy to talk to everybody. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to get to talk about this work in this way. Thank you. Let's go to questions. Conversation, hairdressers, looking at... Yeah.
Yeah, I have kind of maybe like an obvious question, but have you been able to reconnect with anyone who's gone through the process and see, like, did they actually do their queer world making? Like, any follow-up with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I didn't talk about this, but I've had, like, repeat people come back. So
cool.
Some of the people that have come to the iteration at the Wasaic project, like, came back to the Spring Break exhibition, and so we kind of follow up on what they've done, and then also come up with, like, new things for them to do too. So yeah, so it's been really cool in that way. But yeah, that is a good question, and, like, as it's kind of evolving, I'm continuing to think through these ideas more. So originally I didn't have people write on their Polaroid what they were going to do. I just wanted to take their picture so that there could be some record of that. But then this last iteration, I started asking people to write their name and what they were going to do on their Polaroid, so that then becomes part of it. Yeah. Yeah, but it was, yeah. I'll stop talking and let there be more questions. So that's a good question and something that I do think about. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on some of the, if you can, some of the acts of queer world making? I'm just curious. I know you mentioned your friend who brought it to Michigan and a couple others, but yeah, just...
Yeah, so that came out of this last performance in September that my curator is going to work on bringing the project to Michigan. So that's really cool. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, I
so
talked...
like a GoFundMe one just passed, but...
Totally, yeah. So some of the things that people write is something that, like, is an act of self-care, which was in the case of this person.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what's another good one to talk about? This is one that I was talking about, Heather Renee Russ, who's an artist, queer artist, already doing so much work for queer visibility and community and rights, and so she is going to turn towards doing acts of joy for herself. This person, Julia, is somebody who is working as another curator at the Spring Break Fair, and really bold, wanted to cut off like so much of her hair, which was both wonderful and terrifying for some of the people in the room, but we were both very game. But she's gonna kind of be more mindful about trying to support queer artists as she goes forward in her curatorial career and her process. Ryan came in talking about how they had seen some homophobic graffiti in a park that they like to go to, and they're from Toronto, and they were talking about how there's not usually that type of graffiti around, so they're kind of upset by it. And they had already sort of half attempted to cover up the graffiti, but they didn't have the right materials, and so their act is like, I'm actually committing to going, when I go home to Toronto, I'm going to actually get paint and rollers and like just paint over this graffiti. Yeah, let's see, what's another good one? Chandra actually works at the Hudson River Museum in New York. Is going to work with their bookshop there to actually get more queer LGBTQIA+ books to be featured in their bookshop more prominently. So there's like a really interesting like full range of things that people are doing. Yeah, let me see. There's so many. Yeah, Eric was another artist who was exhibiting at Spring Break, and we were talking about how he's going to be a bit more mindful because he has some younger family members and an extended family that are LGBTQIA+, that he's going to be kind of more intentional about doing a little bit more homework for himself so that he can support them better. And we exchanged emails too, and I'm going to maybe help him come up with some different reading homework for him to do, because I'm happy to kind of do that as well. Will Hutnick is thinking about how to support queer artists at the residency at Wasaic Project more. Bing is trying to be more of an ally to LGBTQ community, and also I had an image of it in there of her amazing haircut that she let me give her. She got like bleach blonde on the top, and like there's some amazing shapes. It's great. Yeah, so there's a whole range of things that people do. Yeah.
It's really nice. Yeah.
I think this is more of like an observation than a question, but as someone who has a very similar background and experience in like how I started doing hair,
Yeah.
and like the acknowledgement at the beginning of like the policing of queer people right now, like the proposed map, the ACLU map. It's interesting because I had just gone through the professional training process like this past year, and there is such a like shame, and like we don't talk about if you do it at home for people outside of like the frame of capitalism and like being closely watched while you're doing professional training. I did it in New Hampshire as well. New Hampshire, very that's great. But it was interesting having done it for 15 years before going into like a traditional setting.
Interesting.
And just like thinking more about, the differences in the comfort levels I saw from like working in a salon setting versus like having my queer friends trust me to do their hair in my living room. It's kind of jarring, and I actually have not gone back to the salon
Oh, wow. Yeah.
after graduating. I realized I preferred the level of trust that I received, like, and the like, I don't know, I'm not the most articulate person in the world, but like, the like transference of ideas that were able to happen outside of a professional setting that like not everyone is comfortable entering. I think it's like really cool and important to be like creating work that makes that more accessible to people who don't seek that out themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, what you're talking about, like fully kind of feels how this project
Yeah.
feels. So the space, I showed that one image of spring break, like they use these old office spaces that have like terrible carpet and terrible light, and they just feel very, to me, not home. I do not feel at home in those spaces. And so in transforming it, I was like, I'm gonna have to transform every inch of this space to try and create this vibe that you're kind of describing, where people can actually feel comfortable and not like just oppressed by the actual architecture.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because people transformed their booths in all different types of ways, but some of them looked more like a white cube gallery. And this space really facilitated people, like, just trying to go back to a better picture that's not just here, but it just facilitated people coming in and relaxing and hanging out regardless of how they identified, actually. Like, so many people just seemed to feel more comfortable. Yeah. But yeah, there's something I think that's also really important about having those spaces. There were also like a lot of younger people that came in that were looking for community, like even in this art fair situation. You know, and if you're, I don't know, if you've been sort of coming into who you are over the last few years during the pandemic, it's also, I think, extra hard to find those spaces because everybody has been so kind of separated. So it was really interesting that it like really created, like even people who weren't participating in the haircutting part of it, yeah, we're still participating and really happy to like be in that kind of shared space where it's not that kind of more clinical space, but it's more of a, yeah, I think in the video I talk about, you know, it's sort of like a club, it's sort of a salon, it's sort of your living room, it's sort of your kitchen, it's sort of a party. It's like not really any one of those things, but kind of.
Removing the capitalist element also, like you're paying someone double what they're actually getting paid, you know?
Right, totally. Yeah, well, yeah, and that whole idea of failure too. It's like, how can we fail to do this capitalist exchange? How can we fail to do the normative space? How can we fail to do the normative barbershop? Like, to fail in all those ways, I think actually opens up all these different possibilities that are important. I also feel like there's this pressure right now too to like show, I feel like it's on maybe young people too, and I'm also a teacher, but to sort of do things perfectly and to not mess up. And that's a crazy amount of pressure. Maybe it's due to social media, I don't know what it is, but there's something about saying, yeah, you can, especially with your hair, you don't have to do it right. It could be crazy. You'll be fine. It's also going to grow out, so the stakes are like a little bit lower, right? But just the idea that it's okay to fail, it's okay to mess something up. Like it's actually probably where we learn the most, right? So anyway, I'm going on a whole rant, and I already ranted for like 45 minutes, so I should let you ask more questions. But these are great questions, so thank you. Comments, questions? What else?
What made you start cutting hair?
Oh,
This
yeah.
is like other people's versus just your own, you know?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think being an artist first, before anything else, before a scholar, I just always felt like, well, I can do that. I can figure that out. And so I was like, well, I don't have a lot of money. I need a haircut. I can figure it out. I think that's where it started. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, I've been doing mine, and it looks pretty good. So then other people were like, I also don't have a lot of money. I need a haircut. Yeah, you're familiar with this, I think. Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, like, while I'm doing it, it seems, you know, my first kind of creative outlets were, like, drawing. And so it's a lot about kind of drawing a sculpture when you're cutting hair. It's like lines and shapes and shading. What else? What else we got?
Who is Nacho to you?
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but, well, Nacho is just this guy that comes into my life sometimes, but Nacho is also Libby, who is my partner, who is also my oftentimes collaborator. She's the best. She's over there. Yeah, that's Nacho. Libby has known Nacho longer than Libby has known me. So that's a fun fact.
Can I ask, there's tinfoil in a
Yeah.
lot of and you briefly mentioned that material,
Yeah.
and you talked a little bit, about some of the materials, but I've heard you talk about, like you've expanded on tinfoil specifically in some of the conversations in Barbershop. Do you want to talk about this one in particular? This whole room was covered in tinfoil.
Yeah. You know, because you helped me
I was
cover it. Yeah, I mean, the behind the scenes of transferring the space is that I got so many huge rolls of aluminum foil, and we very meticulously rolled it out so as not to have it crumple, because aluminum foil as a material, if it crumples, it goes into, it's funny because there's a fine line between it looking trashy in a good way and trashy in a way that I don't like. And so we were trying to keep it on the fine line where it didn't look too crumply, which is actually extremely hard. There's also two sides to tinfoil, one that's matte and one that's glossy. And so we had to be sure to have the glossy side facing out, because that's also all about kind of reflecting the light, the disco ball, the tinfoil, the glitter curtains, and then using that to really transform the space, because in spring break, there were a lot of limitations on the types of materials that you could use, and also getting there and being able to get in. There were a lot of limitations with installation, which were fun, creative challenges to sort out. One load in on a freight elevator, and you had a 30-minute window to get all your stuff in, and that had to explode and then become your entire space. And as I said before, a lot of people just did kind of white cubes in their spaces and then hung work on the wall. So aluminum foil, you carry it in small, you roll it up, takes up a lot of space. Also, Andy Warhol's factory famously was covered in a lot of silver, and so it's also kind of this art historical nod to that. Is that enough about tinfoil?
Yeah, and also I think it's a really cool, accessible material.
Oh, thank you.
There's
Yes.
something really, there's something in that you've talked about, and with the materials and with, there's just an effort to, there's an accessibility
Yeah.
to the materials, from the Polaroid pictures to the curtains to the disco ball,
Yeah.
So I think there's something really unique about, and also queerly failing as a decorator using these accessible
Totally.
materials
Totally.
too,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
something there
Yeah,
that's
there's like
unique to this
camp and
experience.
kitsch
Yeah.
and low cost, and yeah, totally, yeah, thank you. Yeah, and then also it became this cool record, this like recording device of all the people that had been in there too. But yeah, I mean, I think that may be partly to why it is an inviting space. There's also, I didn't include any sound, but there's this whole playlist of all these different queer musicians, so that kind of like filters out and then also helps create the vibe as well. Yeah. Good point. Cool. Other questions? Comments? I also do these little tiny hair drawings. Little pencil, little hair drawings. Oh, no. But there was, yeah, the one person, Julia, who had like 8 inches or more cut of her hair, her friend was encouraging her to maybe keep her hair, but she actually was going to go donate her hair. Yeah. And somebody else cut kind of a lot of hair off, and her friend was like, you should keep it. But we talked about how sort of keeping hair sometimes feels strange. So it was more of like I'm going to let this go, right? It was more of like, I'm going to embrace this queerness in some way, even if I'm a straight cis person, I'm going to embrace this queerness and like let this hair kind of go. So it's like, yeah, it's more about that kind of release. Yeah. Yeah. What were you thinking about it? Yeah.
Kind of, I've had a couple of people, specifically one Indigenous friend of mine actually keep like the very small amount that they were comfortable with, like that they needed to remove. They kept that. I have a friend who kept a beard that he had worn for like 5 years. He shaved it, but he kept it in a bag. So I mean, some people are funny with it.
Yeah. I mean, there have been like numerous artist projects that people have done where they keep hair, they keep fingernails, like over periods of time, and then kind of like collect them. But yeah, that's lots of my interest. Yeah. Well, thank you everybody so much. I'll put my little thank you slide up again if you want to keep in touch or have follow-up questions or want to shoot me a little Instagram question or something. Yeah, it's been really nice talking to everybody. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.